Vincent, thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate it very much. And I think that our listeners will appreciate it very much because I know just whenever I go anywhere to a conference or any sort of event, a lot of the calls that I'm on, the recurring theme for most learning professionals, learning leaders is around, measurement. How do I know all of this great stuff that we're talking about, all the things that we're trying to do? How do I know that it works? And, let's be honest, for most folks in L&D, they don't come at it from a data and analytics background, right? That's not where they're coming from. They're on the side of pedagogy and understanding how people learn and implementing technologies from that perspective. So, a lot of times they're faced with stuff that's not necessarily natural to them. So I'm glad that you are here to sort of talk a little bit about the reporting and analytics side of it. I mean, so from your perspective, you come at this from you have an analytics background, and when you talk to other organizations, do you often, does the conversation around L&D come up? Is it more of a broader HR? Because we know how much the rest of the business is invested in data and how that all works. It's a little different when you get to the people side of things. But do you end up in a lot of conversations around the analytics of learning?
I'd say analytics as a whole is a very big theme when it comes to people. It's definitely a growing theme, which even accelerates with the advent of Gen AI, because that's also a way to make it way more accessible from an adoption standpoint from non-data savvy people. And I hope it's not going to be perceived as an offense, but HR people and learning professionals are not per se data savvy. And yeah, we see this theme being really, really critical. And we also see from a partner side, so the entire ecosystem, positioning themselves on how they can approach when it comes to learning, the impact that learning has on people and therefore on their organization. So for every dollar they invest, how much does it yield in return?
Yeah. Well, lucky for you, I've checked the analytics, and we do have a bit of a global audience, heavily North American, but I think everyone follows that. And I don't think it is an offense that maybe HR and learning people aren't maybe data savvy. I don't think folks they look at that as the recognition of that I think I see that as a strength, right? As if you understand what you're good at and where you need help, then you can seek out that help, right? And most of the learning professionals I know are fantastic at what they do, are creating some of the best learning, delivering it, and just great strategy. And what they need are the tools to help them with the analytics piece. I think we do see some success. Some companies are like, if they have the ability, they'll bring in analytics skills where they can, often sort of as a shared skill in the organization, right? So it doesn't belong to learning, but there's somebody there that they can rely on to help them. I think that is a great solution to this. But in lieu of all L&D leaders being data scientists, I think it comes down, we have to recognize the reality of we're going to rely heavily on tools. And as a guest, you've broken the speed record of mentioning AI right out of the gate. So I appreciate that, because it's very important in this particular conversation, because that's where the help's going to come. I think the better these tools get at understanding how people see the issues in front of them and how they want to solve them, that's where the AI is going to help to deliver those kind of results. I mean, is that what you're seeing as this starts to manifest and become more real?
Yeah, and I think it's the ability when it comes to AI applied to analytics and to help HR, but any other part of the organization. It's really about adoption. It's really this ability to query in natural language. So not just be an expert or start to have to understand how the system works and how I can get these data, that insights and so on. No, it's just like we're talking right now. Mm-hmm. And I want to understand what's the current traction on any given learning program that I launched, how many people have used it, is there any differences from one department to another within my organization? I'm just saying like that. And the system is going to understand and transform the words I've just said into a query that's going to be able to grab those insights directly from the system. And this is why I think it's very exciting and transformative for our industry as a whole.
Oh yeah, I mean, before AI was really, I mean, obviously it's been around for a long time, depending on even which industry you look at. But let's be honest, the last year or two, it's really come to the forefront. But even before that, from a learning perspective, whenever I would talk about reporting and analytics for L&D, that was always the key, was that learning leaders need tools that allow them, as a subject matter expert for learning, to ask a question of a system and get a response back. And now we're in a place where that could actually happen. These natural language processing, and they're multilingual, even, so that you can ask in one language, it can process in multiple languages and bring you back all of the information you need in the language that you want it. And I think that's the beauty for me of the AI in this analytics world. It's the missing piece to allow someone who isn't necessarily a data scientist to actually extract meaningful information from existing databases. Am I reading that right?
Yeah, I mean, you're spot on into what you say. And I think if we extend the application of AI to the world of learning, there's another topic that I'm obviously passionate about. It's anything that pertains to skills, skills-based approach to learning. And this is a very complex process to go through. Basically, at the end of the day, what you're trying to do is to match the right learning content with the right audience. And so make sure that you design a learning path that's going to really create the impact that you will then be able to measure around analytics. And for that, you need AI, because, I mean, your customers and all practitioners, they have a huge library of courses that employees can go through. They come in various forms, and you want to be able to understand the skills that each and every learning title is going to be developing. So for that, NLP, so natural language processing, is going to be able to understand, read the text, scans through it, identify whenever there's a mention about the skills, and extract it in a standard and fashion way. In parallel, obviously, if you know what learnings are from a skills perspective, you want to understand what's the profile of your own employees. So what skills do they have? And for that, there's yet another process where AI can help around skill inference. And once you're able to infer what people have as skills and how is kind of structured and organized your learning catalog, you can match one with the other. And that's actually the first big step from my perspective to go through if you want to adopt such an approach.
Yeah, I always like to think of things in terms of analogies, and I look in the commercial space, and I think of something like a music streaming service. And so on the one side, you've got the population of the planet, right, of people who listen to music. All right, so whatever subset of the full Earth's population of people that enjoy listening to music. And then on the other side, you have all the music that's ever been available. So there's two massive data sets, and you can't simply just match them together and assume that everything's going to work, right? So it's similar to, you've got the employee population of either an organization or a franchised environment, and you've got all of the content that's possibly available to them from a learning perspective. You can't simply put them all in the same physical or digital space and expect things to happen, and you can't expect a person to match all of those things. So you look at something like a Spotify, they can tell me, oh, you like these things, you'll probably like these things. And if you let me know if you like them, I can continue to refine.
I think your example is great. I think we're probably a lot, and if people are listening to this podcast, obviously they like to listen to music and to sounds, but just think effectively as those music being the wealth of learning content that exists. And what the streaming does is that it's going to analyze the BPMs of each music. So how fast it goes, the pace, the different rhythm. This is the same that AI does for learning content about extracting skills from each learning description. So you can transpose that. And on the other side, effectively, you have the listeners or the learners, depending on the analogy you're taking. So for those streaming the music, it's in fact effectively, as you were saying, each time they like something, it's gonna be registered. It's like an experience for an employee. Okay, and the more you know about the experience of the employee, the more effectively you know how you can best match the employees with the content you have. And if you push even a step further, then when you're on a streaming, they are then going to be able to recommend, okay, because you've done this, you've listened to that music and that music that you seem to like, you might also like this one. That's the same for learning, obviously. And this is also then about addressing the skill gaps. And when you address the skill gaps, this is where you really start to have an impact both on your employee growth and your organization performance. And we're back to analytics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that's it. All of these things work and function and get better only because of analytics, right? That's the whole point. And often these tools that employ AI within them, a lot of companies, buyers, individuals, what it is, they think that this thing is going to solve the problem and do what it does out of the box. Day one, I'm going to plug this in, turn it on, whatever it is, and it's going to do the things that I need it to do. But the definition of what AI ultimately is and built on includes things like machine learning, which it has to learn. It has to get better over time. And that requires, at least for now, some human input until we feel like we can sort of let it go on your own. Do you think we're still in that stage, or is there the need for that hand holding by people? Is that more of our own perception? Like we feel like we need to do that, or do we still need to do that from a practical sense?
I still think the human intervention is critical, also from an ethical standpoint. I think that's important.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, those models and systems need to be trained, as you mentioned it. And in the end, the AI, from my perspective, is there to augment whatever we do. It's not there to replace how we go about it. So whether that's to build the capability in itself or then leverage it as practitioners, you're still going to need the human intervention. It's not just going to do it everything end to end for you.
Right. So, obviously you mentioned that we've been talking about skills and you have a focus in that area. I think it's an interesting area, especially based on that, what we just talked about. Companies have struggled with skills for a very long time, even as it's, I don't want to say popularity, but the focus on skills has grown over the past few years. There's been a big focus on like, okay, this is the solution, is we need to build skills, whatever those are. And that's sort of where we are now, is the importance has risen, but companies haven't really solved the issue of what the skills that they need are. I go back to my own experience in doing sort of analysis and consultative type work, and organizations will come and say, do you have a skills taxonomy that we can use? Is there one available? What they want was just a list that somebody else had already put together and curated that they could use. And it was always no. I mean, there might be at least maybe a very basic thing that you can use, but I would think for every organization, based on whatever their goals are, it's a relatively unique thing. So what we have on the one side of this issue is a very messy skills environment. Most organizations probably have too many if they've identified them at all. And so when we talk about skills gaps. I don't know if they can actually even really get there yet because they don't know what skills they have. Do you think that's the case? Are we getting better at that?
I think we're getting better, but I would formulate my answer in several sequences. The first thing where I agree with you is organization needs to ask themselves the question as to why they're using skills for. If it's just to catalog the skills they have, it's useless. Because at the end of the day, I mean, if this is just for an intellectual kind of work to be done, that's not going to contribute to the overall value of the business. Now the question is, how does the fact of having that data helps me impact my company business? And there it starts to be more interesting. It's going to impact your business because if you're able to understand and map your organization skills, you're going to see where you have pitfalls. Pitfalls being, what are the skills that I have a shortage of? What are the skills that are currently possessed by people who are close to be retired? And then it's going to help me inform my succession planning. What are the skills that are going to be automated out by technology in a short or mid future? So all these elements are then going to be able to help you inform your either build, buy, or borrow strategy. So basically your learning, recruiting, or freelancing strategy overall. So that's important. Now, how it can be done, I think this is where sometimes organization kind of lose sight of their pragmatism in a way, which is trying to do it diligently on a job per job basis. If you look at a company that will have at least 5,000 employees, so pretty much that spectrum, it means that they would typically have in the vicinity of 150 to 250 roles, different roles in the organization. The average role has about 22 skills. When I mention skills, it's a mix of hard skills, soft skills, and knowledge. So, of course, there's going to be overlaps. Some skills are going to be in different jobs, and you're going to find them in different jobs. But at the end of the day, it means that those in charge of cataloging the skills are going to have to regroup about an inventory of 3,000 skills for the organization as a whole. That's a lot, with all the pairing and association. So without leveraging AI, you're just gonna overwhelm the organization. That's typically what happens. So what you want to do is really to focus on the 20% of jobs that are really key and critical for your organization, have the right level of diligence and critical thinking around what makes it to the list and why we think it's important. But don't bother for the 80% remaining. Like, let the AI do the job. So I say that's my view on it. Now, where I would challenge you a bit, you mentioned the fact that probably that skill architecture will be very different from one company to another. I still think that jobs in general, and probably I'd say 90% of the job are the same in any organization. They will call them a bit differently. Okay, there will probably be one or two skills that will be different because they use different toolings, but that's too tactical. And why it's important to come up with a standardized framework or ontology, it's then because you want to be able to benchmark, to compare the organization themselves. You want to be able to create career pathing, learning pathing, and identifying those skill gaps. And so if you don't have a standardized framework, you make that job almost impossible to cope with.
Yeah, no, I can see that for sure. And I think when I was saying that, I was probably being too broad, because I think you're right. I think you start to dig into specific industries and you say, hey, this is a restaurant chain, and although their food and their culture might be completely different from this other restaurant chain, the jobs and the challenges and the things they're doing, you can sort of boil those down
Yeah.
to those needs. Yeah, I definitely see that. I think in you describing all of that, you highlight something interesting in that is difficult for a lot of companies for whatever reason. It's not that they don't want to do these things, but it's the connectedness of things, right? So this idea of the skills inventory, it is not this thing that lives by itself and is useful by itself. But
Yeah.
you mentioned things like, oh, well, what is this? How does whatever is going on in succession planning feed into that? Because if you take a skills inventory and it says, I have these, X skills on hand, but if that person is leaving at the end of the year, you don't know that by looking at this. So am I feeding that into there? And then do I have performance management data feeding into there? So I have actual proficiency levels of
Yeah.
those skills. Like I have the skill, but here it's really good and here it's not so good. And here's the trajectory of those things. And that's the thing that when it's a manual process, it becomes very siloed because people only have access to what they have access to. They're only comfortable operating in a specific area. And so the ability, and look, we were already talking about how most of these folks are not data scientists. And I say that completely as a non-data scientist myself, that, this is not their forte, right? And so you want to now expand from this one thing that I'm looking at, this idea of skills ontology. And I have to look at all these other areas, it's going to be that much harder. So that's where you're saying like the AI is going to help draw
So
those things together.
that's effectively, I mean, from a consumer standpoint where AI is going to help. But then what's going to be the glue within those insights is analytics. And definitely what's very critical in what you described, and I think you had the right vision, is you want to make sure that you're going to leverage all the data in hands. So it's one thing to have your skills data. Okay, that's great. You've mapped your organization skills. Kudos. But you want to see how those data fit with your learning data, with your recruitment data, with your payroll system data, anything that's core HR data. Because with core HR, you're going to have the demographics. So you're going to be able to understand that retirement potential issues that you're going to be confronted with.
Yeah.
On the learning, you're going to be able to see if, for example, your current L&D catalog, so all the content that you're fulfilling and providing off the shelf for your internal customers, so your employees, is it actually relevant with the problem you're trying to solve? Does it meet the needs of your own employees? And you can just multiply the example like pretty much infinitely. But this is what analytics can really help you accelerate on.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, that's what L&D professionals want and need is the ability to see that what they're doing is having the impact that it should be having, or even see if it's not. Right, that's also a result. It's good to know if something's not working, but that's a key element to this, especially if you start to talk about, okay, we're going to really focus on this skills challenge, and we're going to however we do it with whatever tools, build out the skills ontology and find our gaps and leverage a combination of hiring and development and outsourcing to, fill those gaps. Okay, good. But then it's like, did any of that work? What worked? What didn't? And can we continuously improve it over time? Because I think there's I've said this before and other things is, when you've got a team of learning leaders and professionals who are very, very good at what they do, there's this tendency to overbelieve in the results that they're a given, right? Like if I just do what I know how to do and I just do it really well, I create a great learning program, a great curriculum, and I support it and I roll it out the right way and I target the right people. Just the fact that it's been done that way, I know that it works and it's good. So I don't actually have to go check and see if anything happened. And that's clearly not the case. We need to see what the actual outcomes are. And I think it's because they haven't made all those connections we're talking about. They don't know how to analyze their own work.
Yeah.
And I think that's again where the technology is going to help. It's going to help you draw that line from, here's what we need to achieve. Here are the things we're going to use to achieve that. Now, can we see if those things are happening? And that's where they need the tools. They need to be able to use a natural language system that says, if I can ask the system somehow in this time period for this issue, did this thing change? And I can get results back. I think that's the key. Do you think that when you work with this stuff and we're focusing on skills, do you work more on the middle piece of the analytics, this sort of skills ontology? Do you have much experience or interaction with that sort of reporting part of it, to show what learning has been doing, what kind of impact it's having?
It's a great question. I'd say, unfortunately, I still feel organizations are still processing on a step-by-step and still somewhat lacks the holistic vision as to why or how that's going to fulfill their processes. But then it's a matter of prioritizing what you want to tackle first. And so that's also another problem that, from my experience, I've seen with skills is it does not belong to one owner within the organization. Skills actually can be owned by learning professionals, by strategic workforce planning professionals, even by recruitment. So there's different potential stakeholders involved. And one of the complexity is to have them all sit down together at the start of the process and the project. Because what I've been observing over time is you see companies that wants to kick off because they need to deliver on their workforce planning, and they want to plan ahead for the upcoming 3 to 5 years and understand what are going to be the impact and how can they mitigate that. So it's more about strategy. And so they're going to develop something. They're going to hire some consultants to help them process and come up with the right framework. Then they're going to just realize, oh, but recruitment, they've worked on something in a framework already because of the jobs that we hire the most. Oh, and learning have also developed. And you're like, wow, what if you had talked to each other at the beginning? I mean, it would probably have sped up and align the vision as to why you're doing skills for.
Yeah. So two things in there that stand out to me. One is the second time you've brought up prioritization. And I think that's such a key element that, to keep all of this stuff from becoming overwhelming, it is, okay, start somewhere.
Yes.
And start with what's most important. So you can do that and work on it and get that right. And then use that as a model for other things as you move forward. But it's always about, what is the most important thing we need to tackle instead of let's solve this entire thing right out of the gate.
And don't try to achieve perfection because it simply does not exist. And that's what's going to hold you back from getting shit done. So at the end of the day, just like do your stuff. I mean, and you will iterate.
Yeah. We're all familiar with it. Just you get paralyzed if it's too much. And that's sort of why we are where we are, is that it seems a bit overwhelming. And the other piece that you mentioned too is also such an important way to get things like this to happen and get them to work. It's as much as we've talked over the years about breaking down silos and flattening organizations and everybody working together. It doesn't happen very well in practice. Everyone has their jobs they're trying to do that day. And so they get very focused on that. And yeah, if we can just have the conversations with the people who know the things, because we all know things, let's bring them all together so we can see the whole picture instead of trying to guess or sort out what's happening on the other side of these walls. One thing that I would ask about you about this, one of the voices that probably should be invited to those kinds of conversations, I feel, are managers. And you tell me about, this is my perception of this from a skills standpoint. I feel like a team leader, managers, those kinds of people, they have a more intimate knowledge of not only the skills that their particular part of the business needs, what they look like in practice, right? What those skills actually look like. And also the nature of the people that we are trying to impart those skills to, right? You know, how they work, what their mindset is. And I feel as though they get skipped over in this process. They're more of a recipient of learning as opposed to an asset in learning for them. I mean, is it too much to ask? Does that just confuse the issue if you have too many voices? But I feel like that's a missing voice.
Uh, I'd say you're right and wrong at the same time. Philosophically, you're right. Now, from a practical approach, it makes it more complex. One of the pitfalls I've observed is the more you try to ask managers, the more you overwhelm the organization. So typically, you're going to have, let's say, 12 to 15 different departments, main departments or business units within your organization, which themselves are going to have their sub ramifications. And if you start asking all those subject matter experts about what they think, first, it's going to take them time. Second, out of the blue, even if I ask you, like right on the spot, what skills do you have? You're going to have to process and you're going to come up with your own way of formulating this. So I think a way to kind of circumvent the process is to infer the skills. From the moment you know and you're able to catalog all the jobs and all the roles that exist within the company, you're then able to infer the skills that this business unit has. And then it's more about having them participate to vet that first output. Because at least they can be, first they have a framework. So it's already standardized and there's a certain way of formulating how the skills should be named. And you're asking them to rather select or work on something rather than create from scratch, which is way more difficult. So that's the caveat I would put into your preliminary assumption.
Now that makes complete sense. You know, that's the challenge, right? And that's why I sort of added that caveat of is it too much? Is it right to muddy the waters? There's got to be an approach, and you know, again, we're always talking about people, so there's all these variables involved. But there is that issue of, at least if you're going to do it sort of that way, making that manager or that level of person aware of what's happening and how it's going to work. Because I feel like a lot of managers presented with, hey, we ran this program and we developed a list of skills. They're gonna be like, well, nobody asked me, and no machine's going to tell me what my people need. You know, so because that happens just from, forget about AI, forget about skills. That happens from learning all the time, where an L&D team will roll something out and the manager's like, well, I don't care about this. So then their people don't care.
It's a very good point I think you're raising here, is at least making sure that there's a kind of common alignment as to, again, why we're doing it for and what's going to be the benefit for them. Because at the end of the day, not sure the operational managers are more worried about cataloging the skills than ensuring that the job to be done is effectively going to be done.
Yeah.
And that they're going to impact the business for what they're supposed to do, and they have the necessary means. So from the moment they understand that by doing that, we're able to fulfill the right learning program to upskill or reskill your own people to deliver better to your clients, to your partners, whatever that is, that makes already much more sense. To say, okay, that's also going to serve another purpose, is that whenever we recruit someone to join your team, well, we know specifically for the skills that we should be looking for and what you deem to be more relevant or more critical for your business, and so on and so forth.
Got it. Yeah, makes sense. So, you know, look, inevitably in any topic that I've had on this podcast, it's all L&D focused, but whatever the topic is, AI always comes up. That's just the world we live in now, right? But I think we have a unique opportunity here because I typically only talk about it sort of in the abstract and sort of in the future and what's nice, what could be nice to have happen. I've spent a lot of time thinking about the marketing presence of AI and how technology companies use it, and sort of beat their uh, audience over the head with it. I think we have a chance here with you, and it's up to you how deep you want to go on this, but sort of the actual nuts and bolts of what we're talking about. Like we say, oh, AI can help do this. How is it an AI? And you don't have to literally get into the programming of it, but how is an AI infused technology going to help an organization sort of solve this skills puzzle?
I'd probably like prompt a question to the listeners is just telling them if you've ever used Gemini, ChatGPT, Claude, whatever LLM that is, so large language model that is. So you know, and you should know or have a vast idea of how that's going to impact and how that can solve your problem. That's my first thing. If you have not yet, and that's for me a CTA, a call to action. If you have not yet used any of those LLMs, just, I'm sorry for you, David, but stop the podcast right now and just do it. Just do it because you need to try it because you can only understand. That's typically the type of things that you can only start to understand and grasp the impact it's going to have on your job, on your day to day, on your business in the world. So even for your kids, that if you have been able to try it. So I think that's very important for people to understand that. And I'm still sometimes a bit puzzled to see that so many people have not yet tried it. That's also, I mean, for HR practitioners and even more so for learning professionals, very important because the way I see their role is they own the future of the company, and therefore they own or they are somewhat accountable for the employability of the people working for them, and making sure that they're gonna keep up with the pace of change. And to keep up with the pace of change, you need to have a good idea of, okay, how can these critical jobs that I keep on hearing about in my business are going to be impacted right now by technology? Oh, you know what? If your business is, I don't know, I'm making stuff up, but is around digital marketing, you're into, well, digital marketing. Look at copywriting today. You used to have an army of copywriters because you wanted your SEO presence and so on. Well, pretty much everything can now be taken by the GPTs of the world. And you multiply the example and you start to have an idea to which extent each job can be somewhat cannibalized, and therefore the effort that you need to make to upskill the population and reskill them. So I think that's fascinating. So I might have lost track a bit of the question you asked initially, but that's more of
No,
the
it's a
unpack.
good sort of, but it's a good sort of call, like you said, call to action to start. Like if you haven't at least experienced the way some of these things work, you should definitely do so, at least to give yourself perspective. But what we can do then is, I think people would love to understand. We talk about skills ontologies and mapping to content. Like I can say these things, but how is an AI infused technology going to help? What is that technology going to do? So, for instance, when you were talking about organizations and the skills, and you're talking about inferring skills. So, to me, is there a suggestion that for a lot of organizations, all the information that they need to do this exists somewhere, right? And they just need some sort of tool to help them synthesize all that. And that's one thing. So like, just give me an idea of how AI can actually take what exists today as sort of this nebulous array of content and skills, and how can AI help?
Okay, let's take a pragmatic example. First, you want to have, in the example of skills, an ontology. So you want to understand and have a framework, an initial framework to start from, where you're going to understand the variety of jobs that exist. And for every given job, the skills that are most commonly associated with those jobs. So typically, we at Visier have somewhat of 3,500 jobs, whether blue collar or white collar type of jobs, that we associate together with close to 15,000 skills. So it's an association. Then what you want to be able, you were talking about inferring, so you want to be able to map your organization very quickly. So the common denominator that every company has is the list of job titles within the organization. So from that data, the first process to be done and where AI can help is about standardizing those job titles. You know that people and organizations are being very creative in how they label their roles. So let's assume someone comes up and say, I'm a senior data guru. It sounds very nice. I mean, that's probably something very salesy. I mean, for a LinkedIn profile, I'm sure like it would be awesome. But what does that mean? The AI is actually going to be able to understand that a senior data guru, because there's the word senior, it conveys a certain notion of expertise and someone that's kind of used to practicing into something. A guru is reinforcing the notion of expertise. Like it's even like the advocate, the ultimate advocate, and someone that can really deep dive into a topic. And data obviously stands for itself. So because it's a senior data guru, then that's going to be standardized as a data scientist. And because we've been able to, the AI has been able to run this standardization, then you're going to be looking into the ontology and say, okay, give me the skills that pertains to a data scientist. And so we're going to infer that someone who's been in a role of a data scientist should have that given set of skills. Doesn't mean that this person has all of them, but at least it's a good basis to start. And then you can scale the process and apply to the learning, scan through all your learning courses. And so what it means is for every course, you have a learning title, you have a description, etc. You're going to give that text-based information to the AI. The AI is going to read that text. In fact, when I say it's going to read it, it's going to vectorize every single word, meaning it's going to attribute a number to each letter and to each word. It's going to then be able to measure the distance between these words and the ontology and identify if there's anything that pertains to the ontology, however that's formulated. So that's really how that works. And so it's going to identify when there's a mention about skills, extract that information, and then standardize it per the ontology. So that however you have called something, it's then been mapped the same way as you have been cataloging the skills of your organization, and therefore helps you match one object. So an object can be, for example, a course with a pool of object, which is then all your employees, or vice versa.
Got it. And then you can start to see, and the AI can report this back out, that where the gaps exist. And then, like you see, you say, oh, we have 80% of these skills, so we could probably finish it off with learning and development, or we're so far off that we need to hire for that. Yeah, and so you can, decide if you need to hire to close that gap, or if all it's going to, not all, but if it just needs some extra attention from learning and development, and you can maybe close that gap instead. And that's, I mean, it's all connected. It isn't some unique, discrete thing where we're going to do the skills ontology here, we're going to do the gap analysis here, we're going to do the hiring here. Like they all need to feed in together. And that, I think, again, when we start to think about AI, that's to me the ultimate application right now for this type of audience, HR, L&D, is the ability to sort of synthesize all of this data that already exists in the organization and try to make some real sense out of it.
It's really about helping to reduce the noise effectively. I mean, organizations don't lack information. They actually have lots of data, but it's about how do you make sure you reduce that noise, number one, and then how do you make sense of it? How do you deliver on the insights?
Yeah. And there's the data complaint has been going on for a long time, and it's not as though we're going to start collecting less data anytime soon. Like we just continue to, and that's where that prioritization comes in. Like also don't drown yourself in an ocean of data either. It's about, prioritizing, understanding what data is relevant. Because, this is a discussion that I do have whenever this comes up. The danger is, and just the awareness needs to be, the AI, artificial intelligence, it's only going to be as intelligent as what we give it. And if you're giving it superfluous, out of date, irrelevant, or just plain bad data, that's what you're going to get.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's as simple as that.
And do you do that? Do you have that sort of assessment with people that you work with at all about it isn't just a bit like before we even get into here's how the technology is going to work and we're going to do it's can we have a discussion about your data? Like how confident are you in your data sources? Can you get people to have that reality check?
We do. We do, but we're typically here to help. I mean, our business is to help organization leverage their data, wherever they come from, whatever format they're in, and make sense of it so that it impacts. And we're back to the same discussion we had related to skills: is you need to start somewhere. So there's nothing about shaming and say, oh, the way you've been managing data so far is bad, or no,
Right.
it's just about, okay, how to get this right and how do we set a path on which we're going to help you impact, again, your people's lives, your organization's business as a whole.
Yeah. Well, I think, that's really to me is the message is it's AI is here to help. There's a lot of noise that it's it's just here to steal art and take jobs. But I think there's some of that out there. I don't know if that's necessarily what the focus is in my world. I think there might be a shifting of skills, like you mentioned, the whole copywriting things from digital marketing. I think there's a lot of opportunity up in any role in an organization where, well, you know what, I don't have to spend my time doing this particular thing because I have an AI that can do that. It allows me to do more stuff. It isn't about we don't need this person anymore because an AI will do that, right? It's we can sort of do away with some of the menial type of work that people need to do. From just starting a framework, writing something short, coming up with a starting point, for an idea. I think that's where it is. Where I don't see it yet as sort of this replacement thing. I really think of it as a tool that my honest thought is in a few years we're not going to talk about it like this. It's going to just be infused in the way that technology works. So it isn't going to be about, oh, is the AI doing this? Is this tool doing what it's supposed to do? I think I just feel like we're in this moment where it's so new that it's changing things so rapidly that we can't help but hyper focus on it. But it isn't, for the most part, AI isn't the end result, right? To me, it's the thing that makes everything else work differently.
Yeah. I'd say as well, I mean, effectively, I think the pace of change is now exponential while we were used to have something rather linear. So that's the first thing. But it's also perceived as exponential because we have access to it. Before, accessing AI was only for a happy few. I mean, just the likes of data scientists and engineers. But people like you and me, nowadays can directly prompt into a console and just in natural language give some instructions and get some results out of it, and we see it work. I mean, it kind of worked just right in front of you. So the impact is pretty impressive from that standpoint as well.
Yeah, I mean, I've played with it myself, usually only to demonstrate what it can do. I haven't used it yet to do any work for me. I don't know if that makes sense, but like, if I'm doing a presentation, I will maybe show this is what art was generated by this prompt that I wrote. That's about what I'm talking about, as opposed to asking AI to create the presentation for me and script it. So I don't know when that's going to happen. Maybe in a month or so. Vincent, thank you so much for sharing this, and I'm very glad because it enabled me to get into a little bit more specific discussion around AI. Because again, like I said, it's very often talked very abstractly, and it's this thing that's out there, and we're talking about real stuff, and you're explaining how it works within this context, and I appreciate that because I know that you can't. It's on everyone's mind. I mean, you travel around. I go to I'll be going to conferences, and I look, and almost every session has the words AI, artificial intelligence, in the title. So this is our world for the next couple of years, probably. So thanks for shedding some light. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, David. It was a pleasure.
All right, thank you so much.